If you could be either God's worst enemy or nothing, which would you choose? We're the middle children of history. We have no special purpose or place, and unless we get God's attention, we have no hope of damnation or redemption. Which is worse, hell or nothing? Burn the museums. Wipe your ass with the Mona Lisa. This way, at least God will know your name.
The revolution of the spirit and the mind continues, my beloved true seekers. In the name of the martyred Hypatia of Alexandria, overseen from beyond creation by the cosmic Christ and Pistis Sophia. On a metaphorical level, I'm saying the great crimes of orthodoxy, literalism, and fundamentalism are healed inside and outside of us by divine reason and divine wisdom, both which are hidden in the black iron prison we never created, but often strengthened when we fall into the lullaby of hipster bearded Jehovah and his angelic baristas, or the victimhood heroine of our own egos.
This is supposed to be a happy occasion. Let's not bicker and argue about who killed who.
It was Christian existentialist philosopher Blaise Pascal who said true religion goes against nature, common sense, and pleasure. And that means on a very real level, with our art and laughter, we together are here to put a stop to true religion, once and for always. We're here to give you religion, your religion, once upon a time, before you forgot how amazing you were. Oh, you modern-day Tom Sawyers, your mind not for rent by any god or government.
By the power of truth, I, while living, have conquered the universe.
On this approximately July 19, the year of our Demiurge 2014, we fully give our darksome attention to one of Gnosticism's kinder, gentler, but just as mercurial cousins. That is Neoplatonism. Our astral guest is a true seeker warrior long overdue to appear in the agora of the virtual Alexandria, and I will mention him shortly. Yet this quote by Eric Davis certainly is emblematic of the relation of Gnosticism and Neoplatonism, and the other unique Hellenistic mystics that defied creation itself and incurred the ire of the archons for so many millennia.
I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you.
And our relation to them as well. It goes. The Neoplatonists ascend through the spheres, the Gnostics' sudden awakening, the desert monks' rejection of the Elan Vital is not simply a philosophical error or the mark of patriarchy, but is fired by an intensely lucid yearning of the highest of goals, liberation. We don't need to expiate our crimes, but to discover and remember the way out of a false world created through no fault of our own. And this way out is way out. Gnostic texts crackle with a peculiar energy, an almost sci-fi sensibility of alien gods and supramundane universes of light. Though not the first cosmic dualists, the Gnostics may have been the first spiritual off-worlders.
From the dawn of time we came, moving silently down through the centuries, living many secret lives, struggling to reach the time of the gathering. No one has ever known we were among you, until now.
So one more week, one more occasion, one more chance for that movement and meditation from the Gospel of Thomas. You arrive at the virtual Alexandria, at one of its districts we call Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, broadcast through the God Above God Dad Kim. Welcome so much, and welcome with kindness and love, you spiritual off-worlders.
Keaton always said, I don't believe in God, but I'm afraid of him. Well, I believe in God, and the only thing that scares me is
Abraxas in one of his meat space avatars called Miguel Connor. I really can't tell you why I germinated this venture, but I can tell you it's been a wondrous and arduous journey to make Gnosticism and its brethren in the esoterica more available in a world on the brink of destruction by boredom and lack of imagination. I continue on my quest to build for you vast futures of light and to midwife contraband truths you forgot once upon a monkey incarnation. Lead you to the forbidden mysteries that work for you and only you. Carl Jung once said that humans are gods suffering from amnesia, nightmares, and anxiety. It is my deepest hope that along with you, we can annul these afflictions, or, at the very least, know ourselves better through the stories and gnosis of so many astral guests who arrive each week. In other words, let us write our own gospel and live our own myth.
People want me to do everything for them, and what they don't realize is they have the power. You want to see a miracle, son? Be the miracle.
We have the honor of being joined by Jeffrey Kupperman to discuss his new book, Living Theurgy, a course in Iamblica's philosophy, theology, and theurgy. The book comes from the awesome publishing house Avalonia Press, owned by my friend Sorita Deste. Living Theurgy is a great read that spans 1,000 years of Neoplatonic thought, from Plotinus to some Crowley to everything in between and everything before and even everything after. It's preggers with penetrating insights and even some very powerful contemplative and magical exercises you can do from the comfort of your mother's basement or your Guantanamo Bay cell or your majestic villa where you run some third world country.
You created me. I didn't create some loser alter ego to make myself feel better.
If you wake up at a different time, in a different place, could you wake up as a different person?
Your consciousness will be surfing the heavens like some soul silver surfer in no time and outside of time if you just read this book. And in our interview, you'll hear some similar themes I've been ranting about on tapping the ass of gnosis, like imagination, inner contemplation, invention and artistry, immersing yourself in mythology and allegory, living the symbolic life, and how all religion is reenacting the myth that can free you once and for all.
You ever feel like nothing good was ever gonna happen to you?
Yeah, and nothing did. So what? I'm alive, I'm surviving.
That's it. I don't want to just survive.
Jeffrey is the founder and publisher of the Journal of the Western Mystery Tradition, an excellent publication. He's been teaching religious studies, philosophy, and anthropology at the college level for 9 years. In addition to Platonism and Theurgy, he has studied Western esotericism for 20 years, including traditional and Hermetic Kabbalah. For more information on Jeffrey, who lives up the corrupt brick road from me in the holy land of Wisconsin, please visit Jeffrey S. Kupperman. That is Kupperman. Kupperman.com.
Is this how time normally passes? Really slowly. In the right order.
Not much else in this eternal now, as I blew my wad and blew some greater gods in the recent 8-year special on Secret Mark and same-sex marriage in early Christianity, which you can find in both iTunes and YouTube. But please support Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio in any way you can. A few shekels here and there, and maybe one day I can produce the sequel to Roadhouse, or finally feed my unreleased Kraken.
You borrow my brain for 5 seconds and just be like, dude, can't handle it. Unplug this bastard. Yeah, because it fires in a way that is, I don't know, maybe not from this particular terrestrial realm.
Please don't forget to support my Patreon campaign, where you can donate every time I produce. And together we can continue growing the endless soundtrack of the counterculture, one of the greatest heretical communities in the history of the multiverse. Just visit Patreon, patreon.com/AeonByte, AeonByte, or just check out the banner at the website. Your support is essential, and much appreciation to you locomotive breaths and nowhere men who support this blasphemy on a weekly basis. I thank you from the bottom of my scarred heart for taking this dark odyssey with me every week through the seas of fate, through the gnashing rocks of orthodoxy, all the way to the farthest shores of imagination. And yes, that last remark is actually taken from an Ursula Le Guin novel with Sparrowhawk, if you hadn't read it.
You're a very bad man.
As Jeffrey and I discuss, and Socrates spoke, all real philosophy is simply preparing for death. When you finally have that gnosis, that living theurgy, you will not taste death as the Gnostics promise, because your soul shall have wings not made with wax of the material world, but with the dreams of the aeons themselves. You will soar above all material illusion into the tender arms of Sophia. That is the promise of Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. You shall do so many wonders in and beyond life and death. I just know it. All real philosophy is just preparing for death. But enough of my drivel, you spiritual off-worlders. Let us to the interview with Jeffrey Kupperman on his breakthrough work, Living Theurgy. Hello and goodbye as always.
The spirit of the West. Excuse me, Mr. Spirit, sir?
There's a beaut. Sometimes you gotta dig deep to find what you're looking for. So you made it.
Is this heaven?
Yeah. If it were, we'd be eating Pop-Tarts with Kim Novak.
Yeah, no kidding. What are you doing out here?
Searching, same as you.
I don't even know what I'm looking for.
These days, they got a name for just about everything. Doesn't matter what they call you. It's the deeds make the man.
Yeah, but my deeds just made things worse. I'm a fraud. I'm a phony. My friends believed in me, but they need some kind of hero.
Then be a hero.
Oh, no. You don't understand. I'm not even supposed to be here.
That's right. You came a long way to find something that isn't out here. Don't you see? It's not about you. It's about them.
But I can't go back.
Don't know that you got a choice, son. No man can walk out on his own story.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by Jeffrey Kupperman to discuss his new book, Living Theurgy, A Course in Jamblikas, Philosophy, Theology, and Theurgy. How are you doing today, Jeffrey?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. Again, thanks for joining Aeon Byte. Like I said, it's long overdue having you since we fly in the same heretical circles here and there, and we live kind of close by, relatively.
Relatively, yeah.
For the listener, could you tell us a bit about yourself, specifically how you became interested in esoteric scholarship and practice?
Well, I think like many esotericists, and as the chick tracks have all warned us through roleplay. And I have to believe there might actually be something true to that. But I've been engaged in esotericism of some form or other for probably the last 20, 25 years. And so moving into scholarship as I became a professional scholar, it sort of seemed like the natural way to go, study what you know. Basically. So I've started, as many have, working in some variation of the Golden Dawn tradition, and then that sort of is the gateway drug for me to traditional Kabbalah, and then into Neoplatonism, and then I guess where we are today, or where I am today.
And as you mentioned, you were talking about being a teacher and teaching philosophy, and you write in Living Theurgy, philosophy in its original context is more than just a mental discipline. What exactly is philosophy in its original intent, Jeffrey?
Well, if you're looking at Plato and then the Academy and the later Platonists, it's a way of life. It is not just something where you sit down and think grand thoughts and then get on with the rest of your life like any other normal person would. It's supposed to be something that you take with you, that it influences your decision-making and how you're acting in the world. And for Plato, there's a distinctly religious element to his philosophy as well. So how one gets along with God or the gods is part of that as well. Something that sort of can be difficult to make that transition from modern academic philosophy, where you're trying to get students to remember what a theory is, let alone being able to actually somehow apply it into their lives, to this more fulfilled or fulfilling way of life that the Platonists and the Stoics and so on, what we're really trying to go for.
And don't you quote Socrates, who said that philosophy is preparing to die? What exactly did he mean by that?
Yeah, it's in the dialogues where he is, in his death scene, where he's trying to explain why he's not afraid to drink the hemlock to his students, that his understanding of how the universe works and the gods and creation and all of that has prepared him for death and the ultimate meeting with the gods that you don't necessarily get while incarnate. So everything that he's learned and experienced through philosophy has prepared him for this sort of final transition, which he seems to be quite looking forward to. He says either it is oblivion, in which case why worry, or it's eternity with the gods and the ancient sages. You get to hang out with Pythagoras and people like that, and if that's the case, well then it's pretty much awesome. And so that's where he seems to have been going with this, that everything that he has learned and studied and has come to understand through this way of life has prepared him for this final act. And I mean, it's an important element, I think, because you've got the first couple of dialogues dealing with his trial and how he won't accept being kicked out of Athens. It's pretty much just, you're going to have to kill me because I'm going to keep doing this. And then he has to convince his student Crito that he's not going to escape with him, even though he could, and all the reasons why. And so it would seem sort of odd if at the last final moment, after making all of these grand, eloquent arguments about why he would continue doing what he's doing, and that the only thing that would ever really stop him is death, if that at that point where it comes to drink the hemlock, he freaks out and refuses to do it. That would seem odd, and certainly not living up to the ideals that he has set in place.
And you also write, Jeffrey, Neoplatonism is found across history and in many faiths like Kabbalah in Judaism or Sufism in Islam. It's not an easy discipline to describe. Your book does a great job. But could you give the listener a brief overview of the origins and tenets of Neoplatonism?
Brief? I can try.
Okay. Twitter kind, 140 characters.
Yes. The Twitter version. The origins isn't that difficult. It starts with this Egyptian Platonist named Plotinus. He gets a lot of it apparently from a relatively unknown Ammonius Saccas, who people used to think was a Christian philosopher, but now they don't. But beyond that, we don't really know much about him. So it's this combination of whatever Ammonius Saccas was teaching Plotinus and his Platonism, and it becomes the sort of new way of doing things, transition of what's sometimes called Middle Platonism, where the Gnostics often came out of. And it still has a lot of similarities with the Gnostics. We know Plotinus was in communication with the Sethians, and he didn't really care for them that much, but a lot of Plotinus' opinions on the nature of matter and evil, while he says they're very, very, very different from the Sethians, they're not. So there's that sort of that connection there. And we see some of that sort of continued on through his students. And then we get what's sometimes called later Neoplatonism, which is really just third generation Neoplatonism. So I'm not sure how much later it really is. And this starts with Iamblichus. And with Plotinus, really it's all you needed, and it's not all should be taken. It's still very, very difficult. So it's not to trivialize it at all. But what one needs to sort of become aware of one's true soul, the undescended nature of the soul, where it's still up there in the noetic realm, is theoria, is esoteric contemplation, meditation techniques. And Iamblichus says, well, that's nice, but mental contemplation won't get you beyond the mental realm, and that's where all the really cool stuff is happening. So he includes or introduces theurgy into later Neoplaton, late Platonism, as I like to call it, which is this esoteric ritual practice that is supposed to come from the gods, is enacted by humans, and through doing so, you get to know yourself or become like God so far as possible, as Plato would say over and over and over again. And so with later Platonism, there's this range of essentially unknown ritual practices, because if anybody wrote any of them down, they've all been lost. From some of the writings, there's definitely a standard cultus element. So it seems like whatever you would be doing to worship the gods already, you'd still be doing that, but you'd be understanding it differently, you'd be experiencing it differently. But then there seems to be a whole nother level outside or in addition to traditional cultus of ritual work, animating statues, oracular work, divination, things like that, which we know what they said about it, the theories about it and how they understood it, but none of the actual rituals have survived. So if they were like the magical papyri, as some scholars think, we have some sort of hints, and I use some of that in Living Theurgy. But ultimately, those are sort of really educated guesses rather than anything we have concrete proof on. So the actual practices of 5th century, 4th century Neoplatonic theurgy we're guessing a lot.
Yes, and one thing that you have many great insights in your book, and one we'll get into the Gnostics in a little bit, but one thing that they definitely associate with the Gnostics is something you write. We both know that today it's very politically correct to say I'm spiritual but not religious, but you contend that Neoplatonists, and again that would certainly apply to the Gnostics, would be spiritual and religious as well as highly intellectual. Is that what Neoplatonism is?
In my opinion, absolutely. From the early history, Plotinus was no slouch. The Plotinus, Porphyry, Iamblichus, Proclus, Pseudo-Dionysius, Ficino, so on and so forth. All of the people that we know about, they're all philosophers, they're all intellects. Even moving into the 18th and 19th century, 17th century, Thomas Taylor, the Cambridge Platonists, there's a strong intellectual element to it. I think there has to be. It's philosophy. It's not just, this is what I feel like, and this practice makes me happy. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but there's certainly more to it in Platonism, and as you said, in the Gnostic traditions, which also seem to be heavily philosophical and mythological and praxis-oriented.
Yes, they like you say, role-playing. They carry their 20-sided dice and sacrificed and went to church and all that. That was important to them. Yes. I mean, this is all real stuff. It's all serious stuff. And so I use the word stuff because that always denotes seriousness. Exactly. And for your students, Jeffrey, if they when you're trying to teach them about Neoplatonism, do you ever give them a modern equivalent in art? For example, when people want to know about the Gnostics, I say, well, go watch The Matrix. Although people wanted to ask about Neoplatonism, I could probably tell them, go watch The Matrix, right? Are there any other examples? Probably, yeah. Actually, I often use The Matrix as well. In film, I mean, there is a movie about Hypatia, who a female Neoplatonist, sort of in between Iamblichus and Proclus, which I have not yet got around to watching, so I don't really know how good it is. We know almost nothing about what she actually taught, except that she was functioning outside the academy. There's a lot of Neoplatonism in the Greek Orthodox tradition. So, if you're looking at the icons, there's a lot of arguments that the aesthetics theory that works behind the icons comes out of Plotinus. And I make a case in Living Theurgy that the icons really aesthetically and theoretically aren't significantly different from animated statues, though clearly not statues, but you could, I think, easily substitute those types of icons with all of the right symbolism and the way they're understood to be produced. You don't sign them because it's not you who is, as an artist, who are producing it, but effectively you are gazing upon the forms and are translating that into a physical medium, which is pretty much how Proclus talks about, in my opinion at least, and what we get of Iamblichus on the subject, talk about the animated statues. So the icons from Orthodox Christianity would certainly be a visual sort of representative of Neoplatonism in at least one of its forms of practice. Movie-wise, I always find it difficult because a lot of people say, oh, this movie's Gnostic or that movie's Gnostic. And I go, well, it's certainly Platonic. I don't know if it's Gnostic per se, specifically Gnostic in a way that makes it different from being what Plato would have Plato, oh, yeah, I wrote about that. So I always find that a little bit more difficult to find something that would be, purely Neoplatonic or purely Gnostic in the movies. But there's a whole lot of Plato out there. Yeah, and like you say, the Neoplatonists didn't call themselves Neoplatonists. They just thought they were part of a tradition, just like the Gnostics thought they were part of a tradition. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the term Neoplatonism is a much like 16th, 17th century German scholarly appellation. They were just Platonists. Proclus was part of the academy, descended from all of the other successors of the academy. I'm sure if you pressed him, he'd be able to trace it directly back to Plato and Pythagoras if pressed, sort of like a Platonic apostolic succession. And a central point of Neoplatonism, Jeffrey, is theurgy. What exactly is theurgy? It's literally, it means, God working, which means, of course, absolutely nothing, because it can mean anything that you want that to mean. It is a ritualized reenactment of the activities of the gods. So by engaging in what the gods do in a ritual way, it's not just sort of mimicking what they do, but by doing this, because the rituals ultimately stem from the gods, you are
not mimicking what the gods do, but doing what the gods do in the realm of generation where we're all hanging out. So I'm trying to avoid all the technical jargon of the synthemata and symbolon and things like that. But there's this idea that stuff from the gods, symbols, essences, powers, mojo is my usual go-to term, it exists sort of in the physical realm, has been purposefully implanted in physical, in animals and plant life, in everything that's around us, so that when we get enough of the right symbol set together, so if you want a solar symbol, the heliotrope and sunstone and lions and roosters and things like that, and you get enough of those symbols together and you access them, traditionally it would have been through sacrifice, you sort of bring out the corresponding symbols that have been implanted in your own soul, and so you become more like that god or goddess, or god if it's Abrahamic Neoplatonism, and so are able to what we call participate them more fully, become more like them, get their blessings, the providence, the mojo, because you become very similar to them.
And like you're right, Neoplatonism isn't so much about having a mystical experience, a one-time falling off your horse Damascus thing. It's sort of it's a long process of cleaning up your soul, isn't it?
Absolutely. I spent a lot of time in the book, I think, talking about the cathartic processes. I mean, there's purification and illumination and perfection, but I think a lot of us probably need to spend a lot more time with the purification elements, so that the light of illumination can get in the first place. And my reading of Iamblichus, especially his De Mysteriis and De Anima, there's a lot of purification that goes on. He talks about, you've got the soul descends fully into matter according to Iamblichus, and so you get this sort of accretions of dross that blocks the divine from your soul, and you've got to clear that off, and that takes a lot of work. It's not just thinking deep thoughts and waving your arms around and chanting in Greek or Hebrew or your mystical language of choice. There's work behind it,
So certainly living a good moral life would be part of it.
Absolutely, and if you're just going back to Plato, just a significant amount of the dialogues deal with ethics and what an ethical life is, and virtues, and this virtue ethics. That were sort of the dominant mode of ethics, really, from antiquity, probably through the Renaissance, before the scientific revolution, and David Hume and Immanuel Kant, John Stuart Mill, people like that. What kind of person are you? What is your soul like that you can live a life that is proper to the gods? I think would be a good sort of ancient traditional way of looking at least post Plato.
Exactly. I think that's what might separate them. Well, we can get to that, but one thing is the Neoplatonists would be very non-existentialist, while the Gnostics were toying very much with existentialism.
Yeah, I mean, there was a whole lot. I mean, there's certainly a who am I and what am I element to Neoplatonism. There's trying to understand where your soul is connected in the divine realm, what Iamblichus would call the leader god, your circuit or your series in Proclean terms, where every soul is embedded in the orbit of one of the Olympic gods, the planetary gods especially, and that's sort of that that who am I, where do I fit in the universal scheme of things element, and that's certainly important, obviously done differently than the Gnostics would have in various ways. But there's also a whole lot of, especially from Iamblichus on, how am I getting along in the world? The world isn't rejected; it just needs to be fixed, basically. And that the human souls, as they go through perfection, have a role in that proper governance and fixing of the physical universe, of the realm of generation. So there's sort of that balance between living the good life here and what that means in relationship to what I really am and who I really am and what I'm supposed to be doing. But they don't exist separately at all, I think, for the Neoplatonists, that they go hand in hand with each other.
That's interesting, Jeffrey, because isn't one of the arguments that Plotinus has against the Sethians is that they're complaining that there needs to be more social justice and this and that, and Plotinus is like, look, there's a great chain of being. If you don't like it, don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out of the Roman Empire. So an interesting argument he was having.
Yeah, Plotinus is a little bit different from everyone else. I mean, I don't agree with a lot of Plotinus, but he has a lot of stuff going on. For me, the irony in Plotinus against the Sethians was always his complaining that the Sethians are saying that the world is evil and the source of evil, and that of course it's not. But then he kind of goes on to say, well, the world is evil and the source, and matter is the source of evil, which is just soundly rejected by everyone from Iamblichus to the end of the Academy, really. And you get a little bit of it again with Pseudo-Dionysius. But even he's like, well, no, it's not. And we start using Aristotle's notion of evil as the sort of lacking, this sort of thing that fills it bubbles into the cracks of a system that isn't working. So instead of blaming the system, it's not the system that's evil, it's where the system fails, where evil comes in. So, I mean, with Plotinus, yeah, the later Platonists would have been about social justice. Social justice, I think, would have been an important element. But then Plotinus was often called by later scholars, Plato without the politics. Whereas when you look at the later Neoplatonists, they're once again involved in politics and politicking, and a lot of the products of their academies were politicians and people who were in the courts of emperors and important folk like that. And so what you tend to see this interesting combination of the Republic and Aristotle's writings on ethics in the later Neoplatonists.
It seems in your book, Living Theurgy, Jeffrey, that imagination plays an important part in Neoplatonic praxis. And I've always said it's an important part for the Gnostics, and certainly with later, neo-Gnostics like William Blake, Philip K. Dick, and Carl Jung. Am I correct to say that imagination is important?
In my opinion, it is. Iamblichus, and it's almost a number of the Platonists, they talk about imagination, and there's sort of two modes of it. There's sort of the everyday imagination as we tend to think of it. I guess what modern occultists might talk about, the stuff that's related to the astral realm. But then there's this higher faculty of the soul, and it seems to be often directly connected to the rational soul, the immortal part of the soul, that allows us to gaze upon the noetic realm, the realm of the gods. So it becomes this mirror that we can use to look upwards as opposed to just reflecting our own self when it's gazed downward. In which case, imagination becomes extraordinarily important. It's how we see the gods. It's how we see the forms. It's how we see everything that's above us, and how we know what that wants and how we should relate to it. But it means redirecting our imagination a great deal. A lot of our imagination is directed downwards. It's what do I want, and what are my fantasies about the world, which are all very important in their own various ways. But if you're looking down all the time, well, then you're not looking up, which is, I suppose, sort of obvious. But but that's where we should be looking from this perspective. When we do look down, when we're engaged in demiurgy, acting along the demiurge, which in Neoplatonism, of course, is a good guy, not a bad guy. When we're looking down there, we're doing so from the heights, as opposed to a lot of us now where we're kind of looking at our feet. Wrong orientation, and imagination helps us move from looking down to looking upwards when approached properly.
And that is interesting because even in Living Theurgy, you quote Plato, who in the Republic was very much against any sort of art that imitates. Why do you think that is? And it seems the Neoplatonists disagreed with him on that.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all the Neoplatonists from Plotinus on disagreed with that and were more Aristotelian in this. From Plato, he seems to be very concerned about being led astray by false images. So that, he talks about plays that represent, the heroes and the gods, and that they're not really representing the heroes and the gods. They're representing some playwrights trying to become famous, make money, whatever it is that Greek playwrights did back in the day. And if you don't know what the gods are really like, you start following them, you start doing what Zeus does. But in Homer, and Plato was not a big fan of Homer. I believe he referred to him as being blasphemous.
Wow.
Because Homer represents the gods as basically being really big, moody humans, which is absolutely against Plato's conception of the gods and the late Platonist conception of the gods as being all perfect, as being completely impassible, which is clearly not how Zeus and Hera are in the old stories, where, they get downright pissy sometimes. And if you're imitating that, you're not really participating in the gods, and you start doing irrational things. And Plato's sort of against that, sort of being a very, very lukewarm term for his extraordinary dislike of imitative art. The later Platonists were of a very different opinion. They understood that the sculptor, the carpenter who makes the chair is looking at the form of the chair, but that's true of the artist who paints a picture of a chair as well. So they try to really recover it and understand the forms of the archetypes in a somewhat different manner, which I think when you have this idea of these divine images being implanted, these forms being implanted in matter, where matter effectively becomes an imitation of the divine, you kind of have to save imitative art at that point as well. But even Plotinus, who disagreed with Plato, still refused to let anybody ever paint his picture, because he said it was just an image of an image and had no real value. His student actually had to sneak an artist in to get a painting of him done, otherwise it would have never happened.
Wow, and it's almost impressive, because I hear Plotinus was definitely full of himself. He thought he was a rock star, didn't he?
Well, I don't know if he thought that. He always the biography Porphyry writes makes him seem pretty modest, but everyone around him certainly seemed to consider him a rock star. He was obviously very important. People gave them their children for him to raise or to look after. And you don't just do that with anybody, clearly. So I don't know if he thought he was all that, but it seems that clearly everyone around him did. And that often seems to me being the far more important measure of a person. Is I don't care what you think of yourself, because you probably think you're great. But what is everybody around you? And the life Plotinus lived, at least according to the one biography of him, that he seemed like a pretty decent, sort of humble guy. Horrible eyesight, not a particularly great writer, and aware of those faults, which is always nice.
Very true. And Jeffrey, your book grants various contemplative exercises and theurgic rituals, accessible to anyone. But it seems that one of the chief commonalities in all these practices is accessing one's own daemon. What is the daemon to a Neoplatonist?
Anyone who's familiar with the Abramelin working, made famous by MacGregor Mathers and Aleister Crowley, and the idea of the holy guardian angel, at least as understood within the Abramelin, my contention is that is essentially an Abrahamic version of the daemon, not understood in this higher self sort of way that is part of you, but this distinct entity that's job is basically to watch over you, kick you in the butt when you screw up, and then pick you up, dust you off, and get you back on the right track. So it is sort of this spiritual guardian that is connected to connected to your soul isn't quite the right phrase. Is connected to your leader god, is part of your chain of being that connects you directly to the higher. And so it becomes one of the most important steps of knowing yourself, and thus becoming like God so far as possible, is contacting the daemon, who really acts as your first intermediary between yourself and your soul, and yourself and your soul and your God. That's this higher form or higher level of expression that you are connected to, without which it seems, at least in the classical terms, extraordinarily difficult to make spiritual progress, to know who you really are, especially according to the later Platonists, where your soul can choose lives that are completely inappropriate to it, and your daemon, of course, isn't fooled by any of that. So once you manage to contact your daemon, it can sort of smack you around a bit and get you moving towards the right direction. And so I sort of see it not as the summation of one's occulthood, or even not even one's adeptness, as we often see it in modern occultism, but really that's sort of the base level. You could call yourself an initiate in modern language at that point, because now you know where to go, whereas before you're just getting ready to take those first steps.
And definitely the Neoplatonists, like the Gnostics, they believed in populating the universe with every type of being. It's like having a giant monster manual, right? I mean, they had everything, every corner of the multiverse covered by some sort of god, deity, spirit, angel, or something.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and varieties of different gods that function on different levels, and angels and archangels and daemons and heroes, and of course the soul, which is considered the least of the divine beings. Iamblichus, when he's talking about why we incarnate in the first place, one of the theories that he floats past and he seems to agree with is that we have rational souls incarnating so that there are as many rational beings in the realm of generation as there are in the divine realm. So look at how many people there are in the world.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on in the divine realm as well. We're sort of a reflection of that.
So there's a lot of traffic all the time.
There's a lot of traffic. And, there are gods that we have essentially no access to that are functioning on these noetic and noeric realms. There are the visible gods in the stars and the planets, or who their bodies are the stars and the planets. There are gods in between those, some that are in the realm of generation but are above the visible realm, so you don't really have access to them. Then there are gods that are in between there. There's a lot of liminal phases so that you can take these stepping stones. I mean, the hierarchy is a very serious affair for the Neoplatonists, and moving from one level to one level of awareness involves these hierarchies. And so you'd have, you get your daemon, and eventually you would outgrow your daemon, and then you would move on to an angel that would be overseeing you, and an archangel that would oversee you, and eventually your god itself. And there's a story about Plotinus where there's an oracle or a soothsayer who says that, they can find out who your daemon is, and he does it for Plotinus, and he's just shocked because Plotinus's daemon is a god, not just a regular daemon like the rest of us have.
This obviously harkens or echoes Christianity later on, how it populated the saints, the universe of saints and angels and archangels. How do you think Neoplatonism got into Christianity? Most people don't realize, but St. Augustine was a Neoplatonist. Was he the major cause, or there are others?
Well, Augustine eventually rejects it. And so really when we talk about where the big influx of Neoplatonism comes from is from Pseudo-Dionysius, who's a late 5th, early 6th century theologian who we don't know who he was, other than he wrote as Dionysius the Areopagite, the Athenian that St. Paul converted to Christianity. And Pseudo-Dionysius has a handful of books, all of which are available in translation, of course, that are all... There have been attempts to show that he's not really a Neoplatonist, and I have to assume that you haven't actually read the books if you have that opinion of them, because they're pretty much Proclean and Iamblichian Neoplatonism through a Christian worldview. But so, for instance, like the angelic hierarchies that people will deal with, the principalities and the cherubim and the throne, the cherubim and the angels and the archangels in that hierarchy, that comes from Pseudo-Dionysius. Some of the 5 proofs of the existence of God, or something like that, Thomas Aquinas. While that's certainly Aristotle, it's also Pseudo-Dionysius. So he seems to be our major gateway from pagan Neoplatonism into Christian Neoplatonism. And there are even some scholars who think Dionysius might have actually been a pagan writing as a Christian to preserve Neoplatonic thought. It's a big guesswork sort of thing, because we really don't know who he is. But it's a fascinating sort of idea. But so we see him, he's heavily influential in the West, as perhaps more so than in the East, though certainly in Eastern Christianity as well. And then we sort of lose all that for a while, and we get Marsilio Ficino in the Renaissance, who translates the Hermetica and Aristotle and Plato and Proclus and Dionysius and Iamblichus from the original Greek for the first time since the Middle Ages, when all that stuff was destroyed in the West. So he sort of becomes our second big influx of Neoplatonism in Christianity. And all the meantime, you still have it in Sufism, because the Muslims sort of went, wow, this stuff is awesome, let's do that. From very early on, you get it in Jewish Kabbalah, at least after Abulafia, who is more of an Aristotelian. And so we sort of see all this mixing and mingling of Christian Neoplatonism and Jewish Neoplatonism and Islamic Neoplatonism, and then we get Ficino and we get the original Neoplatonism again, and everything's just sort of awesome at that point. Well, from my perspective, at least. And so we get these sort of weird connections between all sorts of different traditions, all of which go back in varying ways to the Gnostics and the late Platonists and the original Hermetists and Plato and Pythagoras, and this sort of this weird family where we're all the occultists who come out of Athens and Alexandria are kind of related to each other in some often convoluted way. Kind of like a lot of modern occultists, actually. I mean, I don't see that as being a bad thing necessarily.
No, it's a bless. It's a bless. And so getting to the Gnostics, the relation between the Gnostics and the Neoplatonists, one of the chief differences, and this might shock some of the listeners here, is that of the demiurge, especially because I've bashed the demiurge for so many years. But how did the Neoplatonists view the demiurge?
Very platonically. The Neoplatonist demiurge is right out of the Timaeus dialogue. And in the Timaeus, the demiurge is this all-good, all-loving figure that organizes the gods, that is sort of in direct contact with higher power. We're taking a little bit of the Parmenides there. And is sort of this force that is trying to create a world in the physical realm that is as perfect as the world in the Noeric realm, the Noetic realm, so far as possible. And so he's the good guy, really. Usually depicted as a solar deity, Mithras, Helios, Horus sometimes in Julian's writing. Clearly, to me at least, in Dionysius's writings, Christ takes on that organizing role of the demiurge, and that way he organizes the angels and the sacraments in the universe around him. So he is... I don't know if arch good guy is it makes sense, but he's the ultimate protagonist in the story, at least as far as we're concerned. There's stuff that goes on way above there, but we don't have access to that. So I don't want to say who cares, but we don't have access to it.
Yeah, and even Justin Martyr himself called Jesus the demiurge of God. The demiurge was the logos, the thinking part of God on the material world.
Absolutely. I spend part of a chapter in Living Theurgy sort of going over, okay, so here's the Gnostic demiurge, and there are similarities, right? I mean, they're both creator deities, and that's probably where the similaries end. And the Gnostics,
they have lion heads. They both have lion heads,
and they have lion heads. Yeah, I mean, Aeon, the Mithraic Aeon, is the lion head with the serpent wrapped around him. Though he's usually a higher form of demiurge. He's the sort of pre-essential figure that translates stuff from the unknowable God to the celestial demiurges that make stuff. So he's sort of the translator in between the unknowable and the knowable. But their motives are completely different. Their origins are quite different. That for the Neoplatonists, even though the world is not necessarily awesome, it's not a mistake. It's not the creation of a deluded or mad God trying to prove to his own creations that he's God. It is the creation or the product of something that wants what is good for everything.
That definitely makes sense. And what are some other differences you see between the Gnostics and Neoplatonists?
Clearly, the original Neoplatonists were, of course, not Christian, though there's some argument that the original Gnostics might not have been Christian as well. There is sort of the attitude on the relationship between evil and nature and matter, where outside of very early Neoplatonism, evil is seen, as I said, sort of as the cracks in the surface rather than the material itself. The idea that we mistake a particular good for the good, God, the one, and then we sort of go after that particular good over everything else. And, that messes us up. So you think that money is the good, so you try to get money over anything else, or that food or sex or any physical thing which can be good, but is never the good, which transcends all things. That's where evil really, really seems to come from, which, at least for what I understand, like the Sethians, where really matter is evil. So that's sort of a significant difference. I mean, there are some other similarities. I think the Valentinians had this notion of the Hylics and the Pneumatics and the Gnostics. I may be missing some, but the Psychics and the Pneumatics, sort of different levels of people. And we find, so Pneumatic Psychics or Pneumatic Psychics and Hylics from top down. And Iamblichus will talk about perfected souls that enter into incarnation not because they are forced to, but because they have willingly engaged in what their proper role in the universe is, and so they do so purely, and they're still fully connected to the divine realm. And then there's sort of this middle group that begin to understand who they really are, but still need to further purify themselves, and they're sort of so they partially descend into incarnation willingly, but they're partially required to. And then there's sort of the majority of us who are dragged kicking and screaming by our daemon for purification. And that seems to be at least similar to that pneumatic, psychic, Hylic connection. Though I don't know if for the Valentinians you could change, but for at least the Neoplatonists, this was a progression, that we all start at that low level, and eventually after a couple bajillion incarnations, you get to that top level. I don't know if that goes on in the Gnostic tradition or the traditional Gnostic tradition.
I don't think it does. Not in the Valentinians. And also, the Valentinians also thought that the demiurge would help the universe correct itself in the end, bring back to the source. So they were a little bit tamer than the Sethians were.
Yeah, from what I know of the Valentinians, their demiurge sounds a lot like the sublunar demiurge, who's sort of all this stuff has gotten into matter, and it's not all in the right place, so things have to be taken apart and put back together again. Of course, from our perspective, that's horrible, because we don't like being taken apart and put back together again. And we don't know what's going on, but he's trying to make do with what there is to do. I mean, it's still matter. It's not purely divine stuff. So there are going to be issues that need to be fixed. But the sublunar demiurge's role is to take apart and put back together, that solve and coagula of alchemy.
Exactly. And it seems that the concept of gnosis would be pretty comfortable with the Neoplatonists, because as Bentley Layton said, gnosis is an acquaintance with God. Elaine Pagel said, gnosis is an insight into yourself, a deep contemplation into yourself, while at the same time understanding reality as it is while deconstructing it. So gnosis would be, again, pretty in with the Neoplatonists, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a Greek phrase that's translated as intuitive knowledge, intuitive knowing, using that term gnosis, it was not uncommon in De Mysteriis. It is this complete knowing something the way the gods know it. So it would be differentiated from the dialectic, where there's me and then there's my object of knowledge, and I can only know my object of knowledge so much because I'm not it. But the gods, when they know something, they know it completely in every way without thought. It's just intuitive knowledge. And that always seemed to be what we're talking about when we talk about gnosis in the Gnostic traditions as well. So I think there would be they could sit down and talk to each other on that and go, yeah, that's let's do that.
Exactly. And by the time the Sethians were in the academy or were in the schools of Plotinus, they'd pretty much gotten rid of their Christianity, and they were basic Neoplatonists, weren't they, for the most part?
I honestly don't know. I'm not really. I don't know enough about the Sethians. I don't know. There seems to be evidence that there were some Sethians actually in his school in Rome. Whether or not they were identifying or understood themselves as Christians at that point or not, I have not my area of expertise. Let's put it that way.
Lastly, what would you like people to get out of your book, Living Theurgy?
That's a good question.
It's a Socratic question. No, just kidding.
Yes, it is. My intent when I started writing it, and with everything that I sit down and write, it's like, I'll be able to knock that out in a couple weeks.
Right.
3 years later, you learn how much you don't know. Part of it is learning about how much we do and don't know about the subject. There has not been, and to as far as I know, there still is not outside of this book, an attempt to put all of Iamblichus's teachings together. A number of people have done it with Plato. People have done it with Proclus to varying degrees, with Plotinus to varying degrees, not with Iamblichus for any number of different reasons. So part of it is, getting to know the source of theurgic Neoplatonism, because Proclus is better known, because more of his stuff has survived. We have lots of his writings, and of the 50, 60 texts that Iamblichus wrote, we have like 6 or 7 left, fragments of bits and pieces of others. So part of it is, knowing if you're interested in Neoplatonism, and if you study modern Hermeticism, you should be interested in Neoplatonism and Gnosticism, all these classical sources. This is where this form of it comes from. So there's absolutely a purely intellectual element to it. I'm a scholar. It's kind of what I do. But there is the spiritual and religious element of it as well, that there is this way of approaching religiosity that has influenced so many different things that you can look at from itself and get something out of it without necessarily having to go through, this is how Jews are looking at it, this is how Christians are looking at it, this is how Hellenismos is looking at it, this is how whichever other group is looking through it. You can look at the source itself and apply it to your life, and in ways that you couldn't necessarily do with some of the other Neoplatonists because of how they view the gods and things like that. So to me at least, and I'm sure people will disagree, and more power to them, Iamblichus is more flexible in how you approach religiosity. I mean, he clearly was a pagan, but the way he seems to approach his paganism, his interpretatio Graecae, it seems much more open to, okay, well, maybe you're not a pagan, but how does he interpret the gods? And for him, it seems that there isn't a heck of a lot of difference between the Egyptian Heka and the Roman, Mithraic, Persian Aeon. He uses gods interchangeably. I mean, he still obviously thinks they're real things, but that approach, I think, allows for a wider range of modern religious interpretation. And so part of what I'm looking at is, something that is widely applicable. If you're not a hard polytheist, there's still stuff for you here as well. I mean, that said, I do write most of the book from a effectively pagan perspective, because that's where Iamblichus was coming from, and I think that's important to acknowledge and understand as well.
Well, it's a great book, and I highly recommend it, but I think that's all the time we have today. Jeffrey, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte and discussing your great new work, Living Theurgy.
Oh, it was great. Thank you for having me. This was fun.